But, when I started working, a lot of people, I was astounded how many people used to say, okay, can you do this for me? And I would say, yes, I'll do it. I'll have it done by next week. And, they would roll their eyes and say, loads of people sit in that chair, tell me exactly the same thing, and nothing ever happens. Actually, just to do what you say you're going to do is already stand out from the crowd. So delivering whatever it is that you have agreed that you're going to be delivering. Sometimes that is a contract, sometimes that is sometimes that is an action, sometimes that is bringing somebody else into the conversation, because in international business we know that there are lots of parts which are not present to that particular day, but maybe they need to be brought into the loop. And you only need to do it a couple of times, and of course then you've got to keep it up. But it's incredible the amount of goodwill that you generate with people when you actually just do what you say you're going to do.
Welcome to the H-Files, the new series of the Hands-On Business podcast, where we dive deep into the world of healthcare leadership and the unique challenges facing small to medium-sized healthcare businesses. I'm Hakeem Adebiyi, and after years of helping businesses grow in various industries, I'm excited to focus on the area that I know the best, healthcare, one of the most dynamic and impactful sectors in the world today. In this series, we're going to explore what it takes to lead and grow in healthcare, from navigating the complexities of regulation and innovation to overcoming the everyday hurdles of building a sustainable business in this fast-paced environment. Each episode will feature real-world insights, expert interviews and actionable strategies that can help you push your healthcare business forward. So whether you're a leader in the space or an entrepreneur ready to break into it, the H-Files is here to give you the edge. So let me tell you a story. And it's a story that I, and I'm sure you, know only too well. It's a story about a global medtech company entering a promising new market, which is brimming with opportunity. They had the capital, they had the product and the ambition. But within a year, their local distributor relationship has soured, their sales had plateaued, and their market share barely registered. What went wrong? They underestimated, quite simply, the importance of understanding local culture, and they failed to adapt to the nuances that made that market unique. And if you fast forward to today, where companies that succeed internationally are the ones embracing humility, curiosity, and a deep respect for cultural differences. That brings us quite neatly to my guest and a very good friend of mine, Marco Rombi. He's an international business veteran, and he was the International Market Development Division Director for Chiesi Pharmaceuticals for the last 11 years, growing them from 40 million to 160 million in that time. And he's now serving on the board of 4 pharmaceutical companies. And his mantra is simple but profound. Be happy, deliver, and take the journey one step at a time. So in this episode, I'm going to speak to Marco about his playbook for building global healthcare businesses the right way, by understanding people, their markets, and the cultural subtleties that drive true success. So whether you're gearing up for your first international expansion or looking to refine your approach, this conversation will give you the tools and insights that you need. So welcome, Marco.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, Hakeem. Finally, after so many episodes.
Well, I always save the best for last, although this is not quite the last, but it's the latest episode, so, you're here at last. Well, actually, you've been traveling around the world most of the time I've been in this podcast, so I'd never been able to get you on.
That's true.
Okay, so we're going to kick things off, and I always start with the same question for everybody, just to get a sense before we get into the real meat of it. So if there was one piece of advice you could give anyone trying to make it big or make a big impact in their field in healthcare, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think you kind of already said it with your first stories. It's seek to understand rather than to be understood. It's very, very important when we go and we approach new markets to do that in a way that recognizes the fact that we are actually not the expert of that particular market. And the best thing that we can do, and you've already said, humility and curiosity, but the best thing that we can do is really learn to learn. It isn't easy. That's not how many companies approach, in internationalization. But it's certainly, in my opinion, one of the most important things to do.
Well, I think that's a really good piece of advice, and we're going to get into that in more detail. And I think, as you said, a lot of people who go international are senior people, and senior people aren't well known for learning to learn, and they're certainly not known for seeking to understand first. They generally want to give their information and their opinions. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. So, as we said before, your mantra is humility and curiosity. So people will hear those and think, oh, yeah, well, I've heard that before. But how do these values actually shape your approach, and how have they shaped your approach to building and growing healthcare businesses internationally?
Well, often I found that there is a real belief in the fact that, you can replicate the same models, the same modus operandi, the same marketing and everything. If it's gone well in one country, all you do is you take all that learning and you move it along. And of course, the learning is important. But I think often you cannot replicate that in a market which is very different. I remember going in a particular market and asking, this was actually one of my questions often. We are selling this particular product. What does it mean for somebody in that market having to pay that money for that product? And the answer shocked me. He was like, well, that's a week's wage for someone. And you kind of think, okay, we're not doing very well. And that clearly identifies the fact why, whilst you have a good market in terms of people, you cannot reach everybody. So you need to have this humility of knowing that you don't know everything. And I think you probably we did a course many years ago, you and I, Hakeem, I think, on the you don't know what you don't know. And it's very important that we start with that particular standpoint. And then through curiosity. We, of course, are all the result of years of experience and having done the right thing so many times, etc., etc., etc. That does not mean that somebody else doesn't have a better insight into that particular market, especially our partner. So building partnerships in the market is, for me, the most important thing. Being of value to them and not just for them to be of value to us as we try to internationalize. It must be one of the most important things that we can do.
Just going to say, so one of the things partnerships, it is key, but lots of times people think a partnership is, and this is what I want to pick up on you, is that it's what can they do for me? How do I make sure that they understand what I need? And you said that actually, the first thing you said, and I think it's important that you said it in this order, you said, firstly, be of value to them. So just talk to me a bit more about that. How did you go about ensuring that you're of value to them when you're in the market?
Well, first of all, sitting on the right on the same side of the table. When you are building a partnership, and I think you already talked in one of your episodes about the mission has to be aligned and all of that. But when we're building a partnership, we really need to understand our customer's point of view. We often start, by a contract with lots of minimums, and this is what you must do for us, etc., etc. And I'm not saying for a minute that that's not important. Of course, we need commitment from our partners. We need to make sure that they are putting the effort in. But the most important thing is, what do we mean to them? And I give you an example. I have a very small product going into a very large company. That small product, unless we can convince them that there is a real opportunity in investing in it, is only going to be put on the back burner. And, the attitude of that company will probably be, oh, well, if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, we have nothing to lose. Because all of us want to be associated with success. We want to see something which is important to them, important to us. So one of the first things I did was actually sitting down and asking my partner, what do you expect from this relationship? What do you expect from the products that you are taking on? What are you going to do for your market in order for this to become of value to you? And that was a discussion I took very, very early on.
And I think that it's a really interesting thing, because I did a session, I can't remember when it was anyway, on another platform, on a webinar, and we were looking at contractual arrangements, and it was really interesting, the questions I was getting, because the questions were all about, well, how do I effectively screw my partner to the wall and make sure they do what I want them to do? And I said, well, if it's a partnership agreement, so if it's a partnership agreement, there has to be a value to them and a value to you for that partnership. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And sooner or later, however good you think the agreement is, if one person walks away from the signing of that agreement and is not completely happy with it, at some point in the future, you're going to have problems. So I think that it's a really important point that you're making there about that partnership. And we'll probably get into that a bit more later on. But so in terms of, we talked about, humility and curiosity. So that leads me into those cultural nuances that you find when you're going into different markets. So from your experience, what are some of the most impactful cultural differences that you've seen that healthcare businesses should be trying to understand when they're entering a new market?
I mean, first of all, it's simple, face-to-face communication. In certain culture, you say what you think. In certain cultures, you say what you think the other person wants to hear, regardless of what you're going to do. In certain cultures, people don't like, for example, to be put on the spot. Certain cultures are all about saving face, so you need to understand what you're trying to do. So if you are criticizing one person, for example, to their boss, almost regardless of whether they agree with you or not, you need to be able to put it in a position which is building that trust and confidence. The one thing I know is that every culture likes genuine people and honesty. And I think it's inevitable that sometimes you can't say something, and that's absolutely fine. Of course, I'm not saying that you've got to be 100% transparent all the time. In negotiations, that's not where you go. But I think genuinely being able to say, look, this is something that I'm not able to discuss with you, and it's a no-go or whatever, has a lot more value in actually trying, and I see people talking all the time, never wanting to stop talking, in trying to continue to dig a hole sometimes. So I think being genuine to people and sitting on the same side of the table, it's probably the most, I like figures of speech, and I really like the idea of sitting on the right side, on the same side, because so very often contractual discussions become a battle between two people and nobody wins.
And the interesting thing is, the very first training course I went on back in 19, then I remember sitting there, and you may well be watching. There's a chap called John Gidman who did the training, brilliant trainer. And he said to me, well, not just to me, but I thought he was just speaking to me, but he's speaking to the whole room. And he said, to sell to Dr. X, you need to see Dr. X through Dr. X's eyes, not have you think it is, but you have to almost get into their mind. And I think the same thing is true when you're getting into any partnership or any relationship. You need to be seeing them through their own eyes, because then you can have a proper conversation. And I think that then links into what you're saying about being genuine and honest. And I think there's a lot said about cultural differences, and there are certain cultural differences, but there's certain things that just run through humanity, which is, people want you to be genuine and people want you to be honest. Now, that may manifest itself in different ways in different cultures, because as you said, some people just they'll never say no, even though they mean no. So you need to understand that it's not always a yes just because they're nodding and smiling. You think, oh, I've got a great deal here. You have to dig deeper. But I think that's what people need to understand, and because the only way you can get inside someone else's viewpoint is to actually have a proper conversation and be honest about what you're trying to achieve and what you're hoping they'll achieve. Because sometimes that partnership just might not be right for you and your business.
Absolutely.
And it's better to know that up front rather than go in on a false pretense. Yeah, and I mean, I call it the colonial mindset, and we've talked about it before.
Yeah.
Where major colonial powers, England in this case, think because generally English is the language of business in most places. Oh, well, as you said right at the outset, well, I've been successful in the UK, in the NHS. I'm now going to go into a private market or a insurance-led market, which speaks a completely different language. And I'm not going to bother trying to understand what they're saying. I'm just going to speak in English very loudly, and hopefully everything will go right. What could possibly go wrong in those circumstances?
And at one point I used to work as an interpreter, and there is a difference between interpreting and translating. We often translate. Translating is quite easy. You go somewhere that speaks Spanish, you take your English things, you turn them into Spanish, and that's it. But I think interpreting is a very different job. It's actually understanding what that person or that partner or that patient understands out of what you are trying to communicate in their own language and in their own terms.
Yeah.
And that is such an important thing. And, I could tell you lots of anecdotes. I'm sure you have them, in different places where, just one in a country that will remain nameless. You arrive 3 people and you say, well, where should I sit? And they tell you, well, sit anywhere you like, as long as it's that one chair, because that they have a very hierarchical way to look at things, and they want people to be in front of the person who is their first contact. They don't like, everything together kind of. And I think that's so important to understand before you're.
That's just the point I was going to make, actually. And I don't know, because we haven't rehearsed it, so I have no idea what country you're talking about, but I've got a good idea. And the first time I went to a country, and it might be that country, it might not be, I remember reading, I don't know how many books about the cultural, differences about how you do a meeting, how you shake hands, how you look at them, who you shake hands with first, where you put your business card, do you present your business card, all those things. So it then meant that when you went to the meeting or when you went to that country, you weren't offending anybody, because generally people will go and think, oh, well, business is business. And some of the things you're doing, which are completely polite in your country, are actually quite rude in another country. And therefore, you've got off to a bad start before you've even opened your mouth. So this is really, really key, I think, as you said. Before you even get into a new country or a new market, you need to really try and get an understanding of where you're going, what the cultural etiquette is. And the other thing is that when you do that, that other party knows that you've made an effort.
Yes.
And they automatically respect you a lot more, because they think, oh, this guy's come from England and he's doing all the things that he couldn't possibly have known. He must have done some research, and they appreciate it and they trust you more.
I always looked at the history of the country, for example, so that I actually had an idea where they came from. A nomad country is very different from a country with a 5,000, 5,000 history in that particular city, and it's nice if you can connect. Of course, some people who are listening to us will say, yes, but the issue is, if you go to Japan and you bow, you know that you're going to do it wrong, and actually, it then looks like you are trying to mimic something which is not right. You don't know how to do it properly. But I find that as long as, and this is where the genuine and respectful thing comes from, as long as your counterpart believes that you are trying to do it in the right way, with the right heart, then it does go a long way. I always learn how to say, please, thank you, and good morning.
Exactly. And I think, even if you're not bowing correctly, and I'm not saying that in Japan that they have a very different sense of humor to us, but you can still say respectfully, if you bow, you can say, I hope I've done that correctly. The things you can do that connect you to that person, where they're thinking, oh, at least he's trying, and then they'll say, oh, actually, no, what you should have done is X, Y. But then that's an automatic connection. There's lots of stuff you can do. It's just about building rapport, isn't it?
And people always say it's difficult to put yourself in those people's position, and it isn't. If somebody comes to your house and in your house everybody takes the shoes off at the door, I think it's just polite that somebody asks you, should I take my shoes off or not? And in some countries, of course, you don't take your shoes inside somebody's house. So we have all actually been in that position. It's just sometimes when we travel, we forget all those things.
No.
We think we can just speak slower and louder, and people will understand what we mean. No, they won't.
No, and there's some little simple things, isn't there, when you're in that part of the world? Even just eating with chopsticks. Even if you're not that competent with chopsticks, and they always say, "Oh, here's a fork," and you're thinking, "Yeah, that would be easier," but nah, I'm not doing that because no one else is eating with a fork. It just shows that you're trying to get into their sort of thing, because it's like if someone came to England and every time they kept trying to eat with chopsticks, you'd be thinking, that's a bit odd, isn't it? So there's just little things that you can do that endear you to your partner, and it builds trust. And that actually leads me on to the next question, because that trust, which is what we're talking about, because I think this is all part of building trust and respect. That's obviously crucial for international businesses. So if you're looking at specific strategies to form strong partnerships in different countries, and obviously we talked a bit about it already, is there anything specific? I mean, you've obviously said, you make sure you read around the culture, you read around the history of the city, so you can actually understand where they're coming from. Is there anything else that you'd think that you do in a deliberate manner when you're going to different countries and you try to build a strong partnership?
I normally make very clear why I'm there and what my expectations of the interactions are. I think it is important, after you've asked the same question of your counterpart, to actually also externalize what you want to get out of that. Because otherwise, what you end up sometimes is, a lovely 2 hours meeting with absolutely no action at the end of it, or not agreed actions. And in some cultures, they will say, yeah, absolutely, I understand exactly what you mean. And they haven't, but they are not going to ask you again. So I think it is important that you kind of also externalize what are the minimum requirements for that particular trip for you. And again, I think that's just a form of respect. We are respecting the other person by saying, this is my expectations for this particular meeting, and, this is where we're getting to. And maybe at the end of the meeting, check whether we both agree, or, 6 of us or whatever, because often it's more than one person. We are all very clear on what we've achieved and where we're going to move next. And that just builds understanding. And I think people respect you for actually saying, that's your agenda. If you traveled halfway around the world, you haven't done it just because somebody's is gonna take you out for dinner, for as nice as that might be. And we know that when we travel so much, it isn't that nice, to travel so much.
It's interesting, actually, because I remember when we worked together, one of your many, many phrases, you always used to say, do what you say and say what you do. And I think that goes a long way in terms of clarity. And then another one of your mottos, we've both, if you haven't worked out, we've both got lots of mottos and sayings, so don't worry, then, is simply deliver. And you were talking a bit about that now, but in the context of what we're talking about, international healthcare, where expectations and standards vary widely across different countries, different sectors of the healthcare environment, how do you get that across? How do you ensure that people simply deliver? What does it actually mean?
So deliver for me is an important word, and I like it a lot, because actually it's not just about bringing results home, and of course delivering to the company that you work for is important. Is what ensures that you have a job and pays the salaries and whatever. But when I started working, a lot of people, I was astounded how many people used to say, okay, can you do this for me? And I would say, yes, I'll do it. I'll have it done by next week. And, they would roll their eyes and say, loads of people sit in that chair, tell me exactly the same thing, and nothing ever happens. Actually, just to do what you say you're going to do is already stand out from the crowd. So delivering whatever it is that you have agreed you're going to be delivering. Sometimes that is a contract. Sometimes that is bringing somebody else into the conversation, because in international business we know that there are lots of parts which are not present to that particular day, but maybe they need to be brought into the loop. And you only need to do it a couple of times, and of course then you've got to keep it up. But it's incredible the amount of goodwill that you generate with people when you actually just do what you say you're going to do. Nothing more. So delivering also means delivering to your colleagues. If your colleagues are kind of say, okay, you're asking me to do something, I need to understand the strategy behind this. Don't just expect to go around and tell people, do this because I'm asking you to, or because I'm telling you to, if you're in a position to do that. But actually make sure that people are with you. And this is another one of my phrases. We've got to follow the flags. You've got to become the flag that everybody follows, your partner and the part of your team. So believe in what you're doing and make sure that you deliver it at all levels.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what you said earlier, is about clarity, so that everyone's clear on what you're trying to deliver and they agree with what you're delivering, and then that being genuine and honest, because I think that falls back into that doing what you say you're going to do, isn't it? And you're right, actually. Just doing the basic tenets of a job separates you from a lot of other people, because especially in our sort of roles where it's commercial and you have to get people believing in your vision, unfortunately there's lots of people who get you to believe in the vision and there's nothing underneath it, and they're not actually delivering, or they're not doing what they're expecting you to do, and that leads to a loss of confidence very quickly. And I think, as you said there, in international business that's even more important, because you may have a language barrier, you may have slightly different ways of doing business, but the one thing that every country wants is that if you say you're going to do something on a certain time frame, they expect you to do it. And that's the quickest way to lose trust. I've said, yeah, I'm going to send you X, Y, and Z, and you're going to get it tomorrow. And then they're chasing me up in 3 days' time. Or, you've said that you're going to send somebody out to support them at a conference. And then at the last minute, you say, oh, actually, yeah, unfortunately, can't happen. You're going to destroy trust overnight. And you could have taken years to build it up.
And of course, the distance in those kind of things don't help. If you have a bad word with your brother who lives around the corner, or with your wife or husband or whatever, you have an opportunity to make it up tomorrow. Sometimes, if you're traveling halfway around the world to meet somebody, it might be 3, 4, 6 months, a year before you see them again. So once you've lost that goodwill, it's not impossible, but it's incredibly hard to get it back, and it sets you back. And the setbacks are not 1 or 2 days. The setback, especially when you're building a business, can be months. And once you've lost your own brand, your personal brand of genuinity,
I don't know. Is it genuineness? I don't know.
Genuineness. Well, one of those two things. Once you've lost that, is actually, or integrity, let's say. Once you've lost your own brand of integrity, we all know that getting it back it's almost impossible.
Yeah, it takes a long time to win it, but hardly any time to lose it, and then an even longer time to try and get it back if you ever can. And I think what we come into kind of really summarize here is that whatever you do in normal business is almost magnified 100 times in international business because of the complexity, because you've got different languages, different cultures, you've got the distance, and it's not like a normal relationship. So you almost have to be hyper focused on those things when you have the opportunity. Because I know that certainly over COVID, there's lots of stuff done online. And I personally think that you lose a huge amount. It's great, we're talking, we're online, but we've already got, a 25, 30-year relationship.
Exactly.
So that's fine. But when you haven't got that and you're trying to build that, I personally think you need to be face-to-face with people. You need to be in the market. You need to understand those people. And I think that's one lesson for me to anyone who's listening is that, don't get fooled by this, the fact that, Teams meetings, Google Meets are so fantastic and so interactive. I don't think anything can replace a building relationship person to person.
There's a proverb in Italy that says that, if you haven't eaten pasta fagioli together, which is, one kind of pasta dish, you don't understand people. And that is very, very true. That does not mean that every time that you need something, and of course, I look back at my career and kind of think, okay, there have been journeys where I've come back and thought, wow, there was a lot of travel for very little. So there are certainly things that you can do in order to travel less. So sharing of information, pure information, you don't need to be there. You don't need to travel 1,000 kilometers or 1,000 miles or 10,000 kilometers to do a presentation on 6 slides on something that you could have sent across and discussed online. Absolutely. But when you're building a business, you need to connect to people at a much deeper level. And then, of course, you and I have known each other for so long that this kind of way of interacting is absolutely fine. It's not a problem. But we still met in York and had a lovely lunch together, because when you want to discuss something a little bit wider and you want to go deeper in something, then you need to be able to feed onto each other. You don't do that. You don't do that online, in my opinion. I think we'll see big companies traveling less and smaller enterprises actually say, no, we need to go there and really make it happen. And, it will do. It will do.
No, it will. And I think we talked about right at the outset about, us as in, I'm saying us as in the manufacturer, demonstrating to your partner that you are of value. And actually being in the market is of value because it shows that you're investing. It shows that you're trying to understand them, but you also try to understand the market. As you were talking, I was just thinking about a lot of the journeys I've done. I remember I went to a country in Southern Africa to do some training, actually. And I flew in. I think I got in on the Tuesday. I flew in, went to sleep for a bit, had dinner with them that evening. And then because they had a new team, they wanted me to train personally. So I then trained them the next day and I flew out the next day. And obviously you're exhausted when you get back and you're thinking, flipping heck, I could have done that online. I could have done, there's lots of other things. But actually, the goodwill I got and the understanding of what I was trying to get across in terms of the sales process for them, the sales went through the roof.
Yeah.
And could I have done that online? Yes. Would have those people have been as embedded? And I've not worked for that company for some time. I'm still in contact with a lot of the people there because of that relationship, because they're thinking, bloody hell, he must think this is important if he's travelled all the way from the UK for one day basically to train us, and then he's flown back. And I think, you have to think about those things when you're doing it, because there's some things that actually are much more convenient for you to just think, actually, I can send somebody else or I can do it from my house. But actually, when a senior person goes to work with them, that has value beyond the cash value that you get on that particular occasion.
And it is about respect, because they feel that you really have respect for them, as people, as a company, as a market. The only thing I would say is every senior person that travels needs to understand their part in that particular jigsaw. Because, of course, there is also the risk, and I have never fallen in that, hopefully, because I used to travel with my area managers very often, so that I wouldn't be out of step with what we are trying to achieve, and I might be there. And I think we were in the same course at one point. Somebody said, somebody turns up, makes the wrong promise that cannot be delivered because they are wanting to help, and then the whole company then can't follow suit. So understand exactly, again, understand where you're there, why you're there, what your target, what your mission is to actually be there. Back to mission and vision. Understand that and go there and make it happen.
Exactly, and that's about communication, because obviously we're talking specifically at the moment around partnerships with our partners in international markets. But as we started off when we were talking about following flags and having a mission and having a vision, that is critical internally, so that you're not stepping on people's toes. And you're right, lots of specifically senior people that think, oh, I'm going to go there and I can promise them the earth. I look like a hero coming back saying I've got all this, and then everyone's going, we can't deliver that. And then you're just causing the trust and relationship to break down with you and your team, number one, but then your partners as well, because someone has to, and it's normally not the senior person who goes back. It's like, oh, you have to tell them I can't do that then. But you promised. Yeah, I know, but I still want to look great. So if you're going to give any bad news, you have to go and give the bad news. So it's problematic.
And that delegitimized everybody else.
Exactly.
And suddenly the two companies are not partners anymore. And I think that's a risk that you always need to be aware of. And most of these things, if you're aware, you manage to avoid. Of course, sometimes you can make a mistake. And I think what is important, if you do make a mistake, that as soon as you can, personally, you take responsibility for either putting it right or putting your hands up and say, it was a mistake. Because that's something that universally is accepted.
Exactly, and that comes back to the honesty and integrity. It's that everything comes back to the honesty and integrity, doesn't it? Because we all make mistakes. No one's perfect. Whatever we say on here, we've both made mistakes.
You speak for yourself.
All right, yeah, no, I have definitely made
just a joke.
I've definitely made a mistake. I've definitely upset people, and you just have to get on the phone, or if ideally in person, if you're still there, and actually apologize profusely, explain what you were trying to do, explain where it went wrong, and then more importantly, explain how you're going to rectify it. And I think that's I've seen, unfortunately, especially in international business, people who make mistakes think, "Oh, I'll just push it under the carpet," and that is a recipe for absolute disaster.
And sometimes it's easy because you might not see them for months, and you think, "Oh, it'll be all right by the next time I see it." But people never forget.
No, they don't. In fact, I was in a country that's very close to your heart, actually, once upon a time. And I remember going in there thinking it's going to be great. I've got a new product. I'm going to really focus on that. They've been a distributor for years. I mean, I'd just come into the company. And I presented the new product thinking in a fanfare. And the lady just got out a piece of paper and put all the iterations of the product that she'd had before and that she launched, and just put a list of problems all the way down, and then she put the products I was talking about and put a massive question mark on there. And I was like, possibly, had I done a bit of research before I came here, I might have known that we'd had all these problems, and I wouldn't have come in on a wave of excitement saying how great it is that we've got a brand new product that you can launch. And she was like, yeah, I've heard this before and these are all the problems I've had. And it's about understanding that and making sure that you're in the right frame of mind and understanding of what can go wrong, what maybe has gone wrong, and how to rectify that, which I did. I wouldn't say we had a good laugh about it, but we certainly had a better relationship after that, because we could then be honest, because she felt no one's ever been honest with me about the problems that you've had before. They just pushed them under the carpet and never say anything. And obviously you can do it when you're new, because I was new, and I just said, right, okay, I accept all those, but this is what we're going to do now to mitigate that happening again. And we could then have honest, frank conversations moving forward, which I think they appreciated.
And sometimes you really have to try and do your homework. I was once talking to somebody very senior in an organization, and they came and said, "No, we really want to work with you." And I kind of said, "Well, do you realize that we've just stopped working in one of the countries that you're talking about because the local people decided that the partnership wasn't working?" And that was an end of the conversation. What do you think is going to happen next time this person rings and talks to you? And you don't want to be in that position. You really don't want to be in that position. So do your homework, especially long flights to get to these places. We always have enough time to prepare, and be prepared is certainly one of the things that we need to do.
So in terms of, we've talked about there's so many facets of international business, and it's very complex, which is why which is why lots of people don't get it exactly right. And that's why people listen to people like me and you pontificating and listen to the podcast. So you have to start somewhere. So, and I know you always say every long journey, which it's going to be, begins with a single step. So what initial steps would you advise for healthcare companies who are starting their journey to global expansion?
Focus. Just be absolutely clear about what that first step is. Don't worry too much about what the third and fourth and fifth step. That doesn't mean that you don't need to plan. Of course, you've got to plan for everything. I'm not suggesting you don't plan. But actually, your 10-year plan is probably going to change 5 times, if not 7. So focus on what that first thing need to be. Make sure that you build. I always say, as a young child, I loved playing with Lego. Being able to put one brick after another and then finally see, the house or the ship. I loved building ships.
I remember that from your little stage presentation.
But just focus on on that first step. Make sure that what you are doing is mission critical. Don't get sidelined. Just stay absolutely on focus and believe that that's going to be the first step. Because so many people try to do things. That's another thing. I know people that I've worked with know that I used to put it on the front of my door. Do or do not. There is no try, which is from Master Yoda, of course. It is important, do it 100% and focus on what needs to be delivered in that particular thing. So we're back to the delivery, of course. But, that first step has to be done with 100% conviction, having understood all the implications of getting it right and getting it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's really a good advice. I mean, I think that first step, isn't it? And putting everything into that. And I think what you said there was about the mission criticality of it, because I think people often start with the easiest step, which isn't particularly mission critical because it's easy, as opposed to saying, no, I need to focus on this because if I get this right, this is going to get my business moving in the right direction. So I think that's actually really important advice. So I can't believe that 40 minutes have gone, actually. I'm just looking at the time here and thinking, what's happened there? So if you were able to give 1 or 2 essential pieces of advice for healthcare leaders looking to expand internationally, especially those navigating cultural differences, because that's what's going to happen when you go international, what would they be?
Know your products very well. Understand the market you want to get into it and be honest about your expectations. I think investments in companies are all about expectations. The amount of time I hear, we thought, there is 300 million people, so we should be selling 300 million of this. And you kind of think, yes, but if it's the wrong product for that market, it doesn't work. So absolutely know your products, know your market, and then being able to translate that or interpret that with the help of somebody local. I always used to ask for local experts and never for international experts in different markets. Then you have the right expectations. If those expectations are right, then the journey is a happy one. Because if things take longer than you expected, you're expecting it. It doesn't help for anybody to get into stress. It doesn't help for anyone after 6 months calling the partner and say, you haven't bought enough. If they're not selling it, they're not going to buy it. If you don't help, I was talking this morning with someone and I said, it's not about selling, it's about helping them to sell. It's not about delivering to them, it's about delivering to the patients in healthcare in those particular markets. If I don't understand how to deliver to the patient and what the patients are going to expect, then obviously we are not going to do well with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, isn't it? It's that market understanding is something I think that people don't take into account enough, because at the end of the day, we're in healthcare, so we're looking to improve people's health. So you need to understand, obviously, how the market works, but then you need to understand what is the benefit of your product to that person and that healthcare market, because that's when you can really start adding value and helping that distributor or that partner. And when that partner gets that, then what you're trying to do is get them to be believers and to be following the flag. And I think there's too many companies who want all the internal people to follow the flag, but then when it comes to the international partner, it's like, oh, it's just a transaction. I want them to buy boxes, and we will sell them boxes, but they don't believe in the product. And it brings me back to exactly what you said right at the beginning. So how are you then going to work if you've got a product which is small in the scheme of things of that partner's portfolio? Well, they're not going to sell it then because they don't believe in it. They've just added it in. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Whereas when they believe in it, you'll be amazed how much work they put in, even if it's not the biggest revenue generator for their business.
Absolutely. And it isn't about shifting boxes. It's ensuring that, whatever is understanding absolutely, and for your partner to understand what your product, your device, etc., can do for patients in that particular market. And if you get that right, then, the business follows. And it's a happy journey, which I think is very important. That's the last one of my mottos is be happy. You need to be able to do it in a way which is happy. That doesn't mean just silly happy. It is about being very clear about what you're doing so that you can be proud of what you're achieving, and everybody can be proud. And once we're proud as humans, we put so much more effort into things.
Excellent. And then my last question is a question that I ask everybody, which is more about the values and vision and stuff, because I love all that sort of stuff. So if you can leave our listeners with one practical piece of advice specifically about leading a business with clear values and vision, what would that be?
We're going back to the same thing for me. It is about respect. It is about deciding the visions that you have, of course, and the mission. What are you trying to do? And I know you love that expression, and I come to love it, which is, will you make the boat go faster? That's absolutely important. But just have respect for yourselves, for the people you work with, and for the patients in that particular market. And if you can do that, if you can really respect people at that level, then first of all, everybody's going to welcome you with open arms, and they're going to do an awful lot of work for you, and delivering to themselves and to those patients. So never ever forget. I check myself was that a respectful conversation I had? That does not mean that you can't be a strong negotiator. Because of course people say, well, does respect mean no. You respect yourself by being a strong negotiator and bringing what you can. But don't give things for granted.
Yeah, I think that really sums everything up. Clear vision. Does it make the boat go faster? And I think that last point, which I think is really critical, is about respect. When respect is given, respect is generally then reciprocated, and vice versa. So thank you very, very much, Marco. That's been the quickest 45 minutes I think I've done on this podcast. But no, Really appreciate it. And I know that people have got a lot of value from it. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Akeem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Marco, for coming onto the show and helping us understand how to grow a global business. And the one thing out of many that stand out from what Marco was saying was right at the beginning when he said, seek to understand rather than seeking to be understood. Because as Marco said, the companies that succeed in the global healthcare space are those that embrace learning and respect the unique dynamics of each market. And to do that, you need to seek to understand first rather than seeking to be understood. And don't forget to pick up the show notes over at thesalesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-notes. You'll also find an option to subscribe to our mailing list so that you can get notes for every single episode straight to your inbox. While you're at it, don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of my new 5 in 5 series, where I share 5 actionable takeaways in just 5 minutes from this episode, which will help you supercharge your business growth. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who might find it valuable. Most importantly, keep the feedback coming so we can keep improving and bringing you more of what you love. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, keep listening, keep growing, and keep thriving.